Order, please. Begin the day routine. Presenting reading petitions. The honourable member for Clare.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we, the undersigned, hereby petition the provincial government to provide leadership and stop the unfair action taken by the RRFB that is now having a negative effect on Nova Scotia's recycling program and resulting in the loss of hundreds of jobs. Mr. Speaker, I'm tabling approximately 35 of these letters, and I have fixed my name to them. Thank you.
The petitions table. The honourable member for Cape Breton West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to table a petition on behalf of a number of employees and operators of recycling depots in the province of Nova Scotia, and in particular the Dartmouth-Waverley area. The operative clause being, we, the undersigned, hereby petition the provincial government to provide leadership and stop the unfair action taken by the RRFB that is now having a negative impact on Nova Scotia's recycling program and resulting in the loss of hundreds of jobs. And Mr. Speaker, I have also affixed my signature to this document.
Petitions table. Presenting reports of committees. Tabling reports, regulations, and other papers. Statements by ministers. Government notice of motion. The Honourable the Deputy Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move adoption of the following resolution. Whereas former Nova Scotia Premier John Savage was made an officer of the Order of Canada in a private ceremony held at his home on Saturday, and whereas Premier Savage was lauded for his compassionate and understanding commitment to helping the less fortunate at home and abroad, and whereas in addition to his public service as Mayor of Dartmouth and Premier of Nova Scotia, Premier Savage is the founding director of the North Preston Medical and Childcare Society and a tireless worker on several international health projects. Therefore, be it resolved that members of this legislature congratulate former Premier Savage on being named an officer of the Order of Canada and express their gratitude for his service to the people of Nova Scotia and of Canada. And, Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
Agreed. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of Natural Resources.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the week of May 12th to 18th is National Mining Week, and whereas mining contributes about $280 million to the Nova Scotia economy, among the highest value per square kilometre of all Canadian provinces, and whereas Nova Scotia's mining industry provides some 1,700 direct, mainly full-time jobs with among the highest weekly wages of any industrial sector, therefore be it resolved that members of this House recognize that this province's diverse geology, together with the province's commitment to sustainable development, will continue to provide Nova Scotians with opportunities for exploration, mineral discoveries, increased trade, and good jobs that contribute to a prosperous economy in Nova Scotia. And, Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
Request for waivers is agreed. All those in favour say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of Health.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas today, May 12th, marks the first day of National Nursing Week in Canada, whereas more than 3,000 licensed practical nurses and 9,000 registered nurses are highly skilled professionals helping patients in each area of the healthcare system, in hospitals, nursing homes, community, and in administration. Whereas the Nova Scotia Department of Health is working with nurses, employers, unions, and other partners to recruit, retain, and retrain more nurses as part of our provincial nursing strategy, and we are seeing progress. Therefore, be it resolved that the members of this House join me today in thanking the 12,000 nurses who are dedicated to helping Nova Scotians become healthier each and every day. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice.
Request for waivers is agreed. All those in favour say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of Education.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that in a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas after 38 years of providing insight and leadership to the students of New Waterford, dedicated educator Jim Kavanagh is retiring, and whereas the Breton Education Centre principal has initiated many valuable school programs, such as a youth health center, a breakfast program, an adult day school, a preschool program, an after-school homework program, and the nationally acclaimed 20-year-old Coal Bowl basketball tournament. And whereas Mr. Kavanaugh's peers have recognized his achievements and substantial contributions to education by naming him the Canadian Principal of the Year, therefore be it resolved that members of this House join me in congratulating Jim Kavanaugh on being named Canada's top principal and express our gratitude for his many years of leadership and dedication to the students of New Waterford and Nova Scotia. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
Question for waivers, is agreed? All those in favor say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Motion is carried. Introduction of bills. Notice of motion. The honourable member for Timberlea Prospect.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'll be asking for waiver and passage without debate. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Richard Doubleday Award is given annually to a member of the St. Margaret's Masters Hockey League, whereas this award goes to an old-timers player who best typifies the spirit of old-timers hockey, whereas the Richard Doubleday Award was presented posthumously to David Mason on Saturday, May 10th. Therefore, be it resolved this House of Assembly recognize Dave Mason's contribution to old-timers hockey and thank the Mason family for their attendance at the Richard Doubleday Award ceremony. I ask for waiver and passage without debate, Mr. Speaker.
Question for waivers, is agreed? All those in favor say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Clare.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'm tabling this resolution on behalf of my colleague from Dartmouth East. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas May 12th to May 18th, 2003 has been dedicated as National Nursing Week in Canada, and whereas this year's theme, Nurses Are at the Heart of Healthcare, acknowledges the critical role nurses play in our healthcare system in Nova Scotia. And whereas Nova Scotia is very fortunate to have such a high caliber of women and men committed to our acute care, long-term care, home care, and public health care sectors, therefore be resolved that all members of this legislature salute our nursing workforce and extend to each and every one of them our appreciation and best wishes in times ahead. Mr. Speaker, I would ask for waiver, please.
Question for waivers, is agreed? All those in favor say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Queens on introduction.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to make an introduction on behalf of the member for Shelburne, who is representing the Premier at a function in Barrington Passage today. And I'd like to introduce in the gallery opposite from Shelburne High School, a political science class, grade 12, who are here to watch some of the proceedings of the House and I believe have had a tour and have looked around a little bit. Their leaders are David Sigmiller and Eva Surratt, and I'd ask them to stand and get the warm welcome to the House.
Certainly welcome our guests to the gallery today and hope you enjoy the proceedings while you're visiting here with us. The honourable member for Kings North.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Where Central Kings student Cameron Williams was the big winner at this year's Annapolis Valley Regional Science Fair, and whereas he won a gold medal, the Kings County Amateur Radio Club Award, the Nova Scotia Community College Electronics Award, the People's Choice Award, the Best Engineering Trophy, and the Best Project of the entire fair. And whereas Cameron's exceptional work has earned him a spot on the Annapolis Valley Fair team that will compete against the best science students in Canada, therefore be resolved that members of this House join me in congratulating Cameron Williams on his many successes at the Regional Science Fair and wish him much success as he travels to compete nationally. I request waiver.
Question for waivers, is agreed? All those in favor say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for the honourable leader of the official opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas parents know that the key to their children's education is the knowledge, dedication, and love of learning that teachers bring to Nova Scotia classrooms each and every day. And whereas Nova Scotia teachers have been eager to keep their classroom teaching up to date, to use every opportunity for professional development on behalf of their students, and to ensure excellent extracurricular activities, and whereas perhaps the single most important factor in the quality of a school is the leadership provided by the principal, the teachers, and the community they inspire. Therefore, be it resolved that this House recognize the daily contribution to our province's future that is made by Nova Scotia teachers, and thank each teacher for the many big and little ways they help our children learn and grow. And Mr. Speaker, I would request waiver and passage without debate.
Waivers are agreed. All those in favor say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Cape Breton South.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas this government makes decisions based on polls, and whereas despite making decisions on polls, members of the government like the Minister of Transportation and the Premier have selective amnesia when it comes to the content of polls, and whereas this government is the most secretive in Canada, therefore be it resolved that the members of this House urge the government to release the contents of all government polling since 1999 instead of choosing to forget about them. I would ask for waiver.
Request for waiver. Here are no. No's is table. The honourable member for Halifax, Bedford Basin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas a phenomenal $83,000 was raised by the charity fundraiser in support of the Metro Food Bank on April 30th, and whereas the fundraiser included a dinner as well as an auction of directors' chairs autographed by celebrities who have touched base in Halifax, including B.B. King, Sybil Shepherd, Candice Bergen, and Sean Connery. And whereas this innovative fundraising event is a credit to Diane Swinimer and her many volunteers at the Metro Food Bank, therefore be it resolved that the members of this House join me in thanking the organizers and supporters of this year's charity, whose efforts realized a needed injection of support to Metro Food Bank. Mr. Speaker, I seek waiver.
Request for waivers. Is agreed? Agreed. All those in favour say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Halifax Needham.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas in 1971, the International Council of Nurses designated May 12th, Florence Nightingale's birthday, as International Nurses' Day, which was later expanded to National Nursing Week to emphasize the profession's accomplishment as a discipline. And whereas National Nurses Week, May 12th to 18th, 2003, is a time when we all have the opportunity to thank the many nursing professionals who staff our hospitals, medical clinics, and long-term care facilities. And whereas our nursing professionals are vital individuals in society and make endless contributions to better health and quality of life, therefore be it resolved that the members of this House celebrate May 12th to 18th as National Nurses Week and recognize the contributions the nursing profession makes to the well-being of our communities. And Mr. Speaker, I seek waiver and passage without debate.
Request for waivers is agreed. All those in favour say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Victoria.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the deadline for flood assistance has been extended, and whereas unfortunately flood disaster assistance has not been increased so that sufficient money is available, and whereas the government has $68 million for its tax scheme but is providing none of its own money for disaster assistance, therefore be it resolved that the members of this House urge the government to adequately fund flood relief so that all homeowners are adequately covered for their legitimate losses instead of leaving the financial responsibility to the federal government. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver and passage without debate.
Request waiver. Here no. Notice is tabled. The honourable member for Kings West.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice on future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Berwick Midget B hockey team captured the Western Nova Scotia Midget Hockey Championship, and whereas Berwick did this by going undefeated in 5 games at the championship tournament in Chester, and whereas the defining moment for the Berwick Hockey Club came in the championship game as they defeated Greenwood 5-2, therefore be it resolved that all MLAs extend our best wishes to Berwick coach Randy Rockwell and the entire hockey club for an outstanding season. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver.
Request for waivers is agreed. All those in favour say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Hants East.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas volunteerism provides services that are often a medical necessity for the general public, whereas blood collection provides a lifeline to many people in medical emergencies every year. And whereas Ms. Janet Bradley was honored on April 30th in Rawdon by the municipality of East Hants for her multifaceted work as a volunteer at the Enfield Blood Collection Clinic, therefore be it resolved this House of Assembly congratulate Ms. Janet Bradley for her considerable and much appreciated contribution as a volunteer at the Enfield Blood Collection Clinic. And Mr. Speaker, I request waiver, notice, and passage without debate.
Question for waivers is agreed. All those in favor say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Glace Bay.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas under Jim Kavanaugh's leadership at the Breton Education Centre, many programs have been initiated, whether it is the school breakfast program, ensuring students start their day with a healthy breakfast, the peer tutoring sessions, or the youth health centre that he set up. And whereas the compassion Mr. Kavanaugh showed to the students of McDonald High School after their school began to subside, he opened the doors of his school, making the transition to a new school smoother for everyone involved. And whereas these are only a few examples of why, after 38 years in the education system, Jim Kavanaugh will end his career on a high note, being named the top principal in the country by the Canadian Association of Principals. Therefore, be it resolved, the members of this House acknowledge the extensive influence Jim Kavanaugh has had on students in New Waterford and Dominion and area, and congratulate Mr. Kavanaugh for his tremendous honour in receiving the Top Principal Award from the Canadian Association of Principals. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
Question for waivers is agreed. All those in favor say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Halifax Bedford Basin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Tanya Shaw Weeks of Fall River is a recipient of Canada's Top 40 Under 40 Awards, given out to young business people under 40 who are exemplary leaders in their fields. Whereas Ms. Shaw Weeks graduated from the Dalhousie University Costume Studies program at 19, began business studies at St. Mary's University, and went on to found Unique Patterns Design, a company of which she is president and CEO, employing 33 people. And whereas the successful entrepreneur, she is also extremely resourceful, developing a state-of-the-art body scanner which uses low-power lasers to customize patterns for her many clients. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House send our congratulations to Tanya Shaw Weeks for receiving a Top 40 Under 40 award, and wish her continued success as her business flourishes. Mr. Speaker, I seek waiver.
Question for waivers is agreed. All those in favor say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Motion is carried. Order, please. Member for Dartmouth North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Minister of Environment and Labour, responsible for skyrocketing insurance rates, bristles at any mention of a driver-owned auto insurance system, instead saying his government will come up with a homegrown solution to the problem. And whereas the Lord Government in New Brunswick ignored the recommendations of an all-party committee and came up with its own homegrown solution to introduce capped no-fault benefits on a system as the industry wanted. And whereas Nova Scotians are clamoring for reductions in what are becoming unaffordable rates, but this government, like its New Brunswick counterpart, isn't listening. Therefore, be it resolved that the Minister of Environment and Labour stop taking his advice from the insurance industry and instead design an auto insurance system that allows Nova Scotians to have the lowest, fairest auto insurance rates, whether it be through regulating the private system or creating a driver-owned insurance system. And, Mr. Speaker, I request waiver and passage without debate.
Waivers is agreed. I hear a no. No's is tabled. The honourable member for Clare.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas May the 8th and 9th saw the gymnasium at the Yarmouth Junior High a buzz of activity as the Tri-County District School Board held their annual Heritage Fair, where 60 entries of various historic buildings from the area, as well as a mock-up of Titanic, were presented to a panel of 6 judges. And whereas the panel of judges made up of community members awarded first place to Kyla Tidd of Digby Neck Consolidated School for her project dealing with the controversial quarry project on Digby Neck entitled White's Cove, which she will present this July at the national competition in Sudbury, Ontario. And whereas Tyler Hurlbert of the Carleton Consolidated School project, which studied the history of oxen, and Colin Dares of Lockport Elementary study of the Sable River Railway were also recognized by the judges. Therefore, be it resolved that the members of this legislature recognize the efforts made by all students involved with the annual Heritage Fair and wish Kyla Tidd every success at the Nationals. And Mr. Speaker, I would ask for waiver, please.
Waivers are agreed. All those in favor say aye. Contrary minded, nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of Natural Resources.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Offshore Technology Conference, the industry's leading event in honor of offshore developments, recently took place in Texas with 26 companies and organizations from Nova Scotia taking part in the exhibits over the 4-day conference, and whereas Dartmouth's Frontline Safety Limited, providing consulting, training, and equipment rentals, secured 4 integral agreements while in Texas, and whereas Nova Scotia businesses are having an extremely positive impact on spreading the word of our offshore opportunities all over the world, with Frontline Safety Limited acting as one of the leaders, therefore be it resolved that all members of this House congratulate the owners and staff of Frontline Safety Limited on their achievements at the Offshore Technology Conference and wish them continued success in their future business dealings. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
Request for waivers is agreed. All those in favor say aye. Contrary minded, nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Member Cole Harbour and passage.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Royal Canadian Legion sponsored a Call to Remembrance 2003 competition for junior high school students to test their knowledge of Canada's involvement in past conflicts, and the Eastern Passage Education Centre team won the provincial contest on May 1st and 2nd in Lower Sackville. Whereas the team was supported by Don Hobson and Kathleen Richard of EPEC. Whereas the Eastern Passage Education Centre Call to Remembrance team of Donald Ebsry, Holly McLean, Amanda Foley, Amanda Campagnon, and Blair Colburn have won the tournament for the Education Centre for the 3rd straight year. Therefore, be it resolved that this House congratulates Eastern Passage Education Centre team, its advisors, and the supportive Eastern Passage Legion members on winning the Provincial Royal Canadian Legion's Call to Remembrance 2003 competition. And I ask for waiver, Mr. Speaker.
Waivers are agreed. All those in favor say aye. Contrary minded, nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Member for Victoria.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Kenneth Macaulay, son of Doug and Juanita Macaulay of Bedeck, was recently awarded a $108,000 scholarship from the University of Findlay, located in Findlay, Ohio. And whereas Kenneth was spotted by a scout for the university while playing junior A hockey while attending Athol Murray College at Notre Dame in Wilcox, Saskatchewan. And whereas Kenneth also graduated last year with his grade 12 from Athol Murray College of Notre Dame. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House congratulate Kenneth Macaulay of Bedeck on his recent graduation and on being awarded a $108,000 scholarship from the University of Findlay to continue his hockey career. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver and passage without debate.
Waivers are agreed. All those in favor say aye. Contrary minded, nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of Transportation and Public Works.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Royal Canadian Sea Cadet Corps number 39, Neptune, held its first meeting in Lunenburg at the Lunenburg Foundry Showroom in 1942. And whereas the Neptune Sea Cadets have a new location for their headquarters at the Blue Building Annex on the former Fisheries Exhibition Grounds in Lunenburg. And whereas the numerous renovations were made on the new headquarters locations with the assistance of many volunteers whose contributions were recognized at a recent Volunteer Appreciation Night. Therefore, be it resolved that the members of the House of Assembly congratulate the members of the Royal Canadian Sea Cadet Corps number 39, Neptune, Lunenburg, for the many years of service within the town of Lunenburg and the many volunteers who have assisted them over the years and most recently with their move to new headquarters. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
Is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. Contrary minded, nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Member for Halifax Needham.
Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Cornwallis Street United Baptist Church is the mother church of the African United Baptist Association. And whereas this venerable institution ministers to the social as well as the spiritual needs of many North End residents and people from surrounding communities. And whereas on Sunday, May the 25th, Cornwallis Street United Baptist Church is celebrating its 171st anniversary with a banquet, guest speakers, and choirs. Therefore, be it resolved that the members of the House congratulate the Cornwallis Street United Baptist Church on its continued commitment to the City of Halifax and extend best wishes to the congregation and Minister Reverend Lionel Morier. Mr. Speaker, I seek waiver and passage without debate.
Waivers are agreed. All those in favor say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Cape Breton South.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice and on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Premier has been hiding from the offshore file for over a year, and whereas the only project underway is the Sable project, which was delivered through the regulatory process by the previous government, and whereas current projects are slow to develop because they are drowning in a sea of red tape, therefore be it resolved the Premier stop hiding from offshore gas issues, but take a leadership role instead. Thank you.
Notice is tabled. The honourable member for Hants East.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas volunteerism provides services that cannot be afforded by the general public, and whereas blood collection is a vital service that saves the lives of many people every year, and whereas Mrs. Mary J. Singh was honored on April 30th in Rawdon by the municipality of East Hants for her cheerful and helpful work as a volunteer at the blood collection clinic in Shubenacadie. Therefore, be resolved that this House of Assembly congratulate Mary J. Singh for her invaluable contribution as a volunteer at the blood collection clinic in Shubenacadie. And Mr. Speaker, I request waiver, notice, and passage without debate.
Waivers are agreed. All those in favor say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Cole Harbour Eastern Passage.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move this motion on behalf of the member from Cape Breton Centre. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the statutory stakeholders review of the Workers' Compensation Act produced many recommendations in the Dorsey report, which was made public 13 months ago. Whereas the Conservatives failed to recognize that the Dorsey review had achieved a historic consensus among stakeholders on issues like chronic pain, universal coverage, benefits for injured workers, and streamlined processing of claims and appeals. And whereas the Conservatives chose instead to bury the Dorsey report in a complex system of governance review. Therefore, be it resolved that the Conservatives, who helped the Liberal minority government gut the benefits for injured workers, should act now to implement the Dorsey report and thereby ensure fairer workers' compensation.
Notice is tabled. Orders of the day, government business. The honourable government house leader.
Mr. Speaker, would you please call the order of business? No, Mr. Speaker, please do not call the order of business. Mr. Speaker, I move that you do now leave the chair and the House resolve in the committee of the whole House on bills.
Agreed? Agreed. The motion is carried.
The Honourable Government House Leader.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, would you please call Bill number 36, the Financial Measures Act 2003.
Yes, Bill number 36, the Financial Measures Act 2003. The member for Sackville-Cobequid.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I'm getting some encouragement from those who are on my right but seated on my left that maybe we should just pass the title, Mr. Speaker. I'm sure that was in jest, because I know, as members of our caucus do, Mr. Speaker, they also have a few words that they would probably like to say on the title. Now, Mr. Chair, Committee of the Whole, and particularly this stage of the Committee of the Whole, is a wonderful time. We're speaking on the title, which means that the opportunity to speak can be pretty broad and far-reaching, Mr. Speaker, talking about the principle of the bill, plus also talking about some of the more specifics in a general type of way, and also, Mr. Chair, pleading to the government members to come to their senses and to be favorably inclined towards thinking about, anyway, making some amendments to the legislation. Now, Mr. Chair, and I apologize, it's just a custom in here. It's just a habit I have. I tend to refer when I'm speaking to you as Mr. Speaker, and now, of course, you're in the chair, and so sometimes, Mr. Speaker, my mind wanders a little bit, having trouble to keep more than one thought in my head at one time, so I sometimes refer to you as Mr. Speaker instead of Mr. Chair, but I will try to keep the title correct, because I know, Mr. Chair, sometimes when you don't use the proper title, some people in this House get a little distracted by that. So I will try, you're not one of them, Mr. Chair, but I will try to make sure that I keep the proper title. Now, Mr. Chair, what we have before us today for consideration is really, you might say, an extension of the budget, the Financial Measures Act, because what the Financial Measures Act is a piece of legislation that puts into law or into effect some of the measures in the particular budget. And there are a number of things in this Financial Measures Act, Mr. Chair, which really I have trouble dealing with in one bill. Because what we really have here is not only an obnoxious bill, but we also have an omnibus bill. We have an omnibus bill, Mr. Chair, in that it really deals with a number of things which properly should, Mr. Chair, have been split into several bills. For example, in one section of the bill, we're dealing with tax measures. And anything to deal with tax measures should properly be included as they are in the Financial Measures Act. Now, I'll have a few things to say about those tax measures, Mr. Chair, but they properly are in this piece of legislation. Then we have what really is a health issue, Mr. Chair. And here I'm referring to the government's foolhardy decision to exempt the casinos from the municipal smoking bylaws, Mr. Chair. Now, my mind is still shaking a little bit, Mr. Speaker. I must confess that I still haven't come to grips with the fact that this government is actually talking about overriding municipal bylaws aimed at improving or protecting the health of workers and others who visit the casinos, Mr. Chair. I have trouble imagining this government would do such a thing against the advice of all who in a thinking way, Mr. Chair, recognize the ill health effects. I have trouble believing that some members of the Tory caucus, which profess, Mr. Chair, that they are opposed to smoking in any public place. And maybe, Mr. Chair, this time we will have the Tories do another filibuster like they did on another occasion to prevent some members of the Tory caucus, in particular one, I won't identify my good friend over there, but to prevent him from standing up to make a motion, Mr. Chair, to delete that clause, that subclause from this bill. Because if you are going to be consistent in your opposition to smoking in public places, then surely, Mr. Chair, those who are opposed to smoking in public places, including those who sit on the Tory benches, would have to, Mr. Chair, be willing to take their place, to speak against this clause in this bill, Mr. Chair, that exempts the casinos from the smoking provisions. Now, Mr. Chair, the Minister of Finance and the Premier, and I might say the trained seals who have been given their lines by the government spin doctors as to what to say when they're asked about this, they've got the line down. They've got the line that we have no choice but to exempt the casinos from smoking, because if it doesn't, then, of course, Mr. Chair, what that could mean is supposedly the province could be faced with a situation where they would have to take over the operation of the casinos, and that they might be stuck with a bill for $100, $110, $120 million to pay off the profits of the casino. Well, first of all, let me tell Mr. Chair, through you, to all members of the Tory caucus, the government already owns a casino, because it is against the law for a private owner to own a casino, Mr. Chair. The government, the Liberal governments in their foolish days, Mr. Chair, had introduced the legislation and established the casinos in this province that are harming Nova Scotians at ever alarming rates. That was a bill that I must add, the Tory members who were then the third party in here, the Tory members at that time also, Mr. Speaker, they also fought stringently against that casino bill introduced by the Tories. And I felt that at that time that there was a common bond between us, that both the Tories and the NDP recognized the harm that the casino would do to the people in this province. We both argued that the Liberals were addicted to gambling and they were looking for ways to maximize the numbers of loonies and toonies that would flow into the provincial coffers. So we had a common bond in that particular fight. We recognized that the casino could create serious harm to other businesses, those who are in the entertainment field, those who run pubs and bars, Mr. Speaker, in the area. And I think that that has been borne out. We also recognize, Mr. Speaker, that it would create a lot of harm for volunteer organizations that raise money through things like bingos to support community-based recreation and other services. And that, Mr. Chair, has been proven in spades. Yet, Mr. Chair, the Liberals forged onwards with the casino bill. And now, Mr. Chair, the Tories, and it's great to be able to say one's not a Tory, Mr. Chair, these days. But you know, instead of looking for ways to try to improve the situation, the Tories seem to be as addicted to the loonies and toonies and the gambling profits as the Liberals were before them. If, Mr. Chair, this Tory government had put half as much energy into coming up with a legitimate, a realistic plan to attack the high insurance rates in this province as you are into protecting the casino and their profits and trying to find increased ways to maximize your gambling profits, then, Mr. Chair, we might have had from the Minister of Environment and Labor, who's responsible for skyrocketing insurance rates, Mr. Chair, we might have had a piece of legislation and a plan that would actually have done something in a concrete way to help today's Nova Scotia families and today's Nova Scotia businesses, Mr. Chair, including truckers who are facing those very high insurance rates. Mr. Chair, municipalities across this province, since the provincial government was not prepared to set up a standard across the province and to ban it in all public places, many municipalities have taken a leadership role. Two of those municipalities, and I only single out these two because there have been others, as you know well, two of them, unfortunately, have casinos in their midst. Sydney, or the Cape Breton Regional Municipality, and Halifax, part of the HERM, Mr. Chair, the Halifax Regional Municipality. And you know, Cape Breton has had a no smoking in public places policy being implemented for the last 2 years. It is to be fully in effect, my colleagues from Cape Breton, could tell me if I'm wrong, but I believe that it's fully in effect July of this year. July 1st, I believe it's 100%. And not one squawk from the casino. Not so much as a peep of protest from the casino over that, Mr. Chair. But you know, compared to the downtown waterfront Halifax casino, it's small fry. It's small in comparison. A lot more loonies and toonies flow into the slot machines in Halifax than they do in Sydney. The chance for the bigger bucks for this province are much greater. There. Now, the Minister of Finance and the Premier would say that their objection to the reason why they want to exempt this is because they could be facing a bill if they don't exempt them. And should the casino consider walking away from a profitable operation, remember, Mr. Chair, I think that we're paying them something like about 12% interest for the money that was lent to build the facility. Can't remember the exact figure, but I think it's about 12.5% on money that they would have borrowed at around 6%. So they're doubling the money in the interest payments that they're being paid on the money to build in the first place. So bright were the Liberals before us, Mr. Chair. But, Mr. Chair, this government knows that by exempting the casino, that there are many who are attending facilities in this greater Halifax regional municipality who go out in the evening for entertainment, who wish to smoke. They're counting on them going down to the casino. And they're counting on them not only going down to the casino, but also, Mr. Chair, putting more loonies and toonies into the slot machines. Now, you can tell, Mr. Chair, I don't go to the casino. And they probably got the machines down there now that you can actually put bills in, so take a lot more than the loonies and the toonies, so you can slip a $10 or a $20 bill into the machines, I think now, Mr. Chair. And so that's like getting 10 loonies at a time, or 20 loonies at a time, or not 20, a $20 bill. Loonies, yes, but not toonies, Mr. Chair. Getting a lot more money going in so that the province can suck even more money out of the pockets of Nova Scotia. Mr. Chair, the Minister of Finance says they can walk away. And he's got a legal opinion to back that up. So, Mr. Chair, being a little bit brazen one day, untraditional for me, I should say, uncommon for me, when the minister was speaking, I stood up and I asked him when he made that statement, I said, well, will you table it? What did he say? And you know, to my utter amazement, that the Minister of Finance in this open Tory government refused to table it. But being persistent, Mr. Chair, which again is uncommon for me, I got back up again. And my second intervention, I learned from him that, Mr. Chair, who did this legal opinion come from? None other than from the Nova Scotia Gaming Corporation. Now, Mr. Chair, you being a learned member of this House, a seasoned member, now you, of course, would know that the Gaming Corporation's primary objective is to maximize how many bucks they can get in the way of profits from gambling. Since that's their primary purpose, is to maximize the profits that the province gets, I would hardly call them independent. What I would have hoped and have expected from this supposedly open, accountable John Hamm government, looking after the best interests, so they would have you believe, of today's Nova Scotia families, I would have anticipated, I would have expected that they would have gotten some independent legal advice. Novel idea, but independent legal advice. Somebody who's a firm that is very knowledgeable with corporate law, who could have taken the contract, and we'd have been happy to give it to them, Mr. Chair, because even though the Minister of Finance did table it, we didn't need it from them because we had it from before when we got it from the former bad guys when they introduced the legislation in the first place, Mr. Chair, to set up the casino. Look at that contract. And Mr. Chair, I do not believe that the casino could have used that smoking bylaw as a reason to walk away from that contract and from that casino. Plus, Mr. Chair, say what you want, they're good business people. Are you, Mr. Chair, going to walk away from guaranteed profits? I don't think you would. I don't think you would for a moment, Mr. Chair. And let's face it, they get the only game in town. There is no competition. So, Mr. Chair, the casino wasn't going to walk away. Which leads me to wonder, what is really motivating this Tory government to exempt the casino from the HRM and the Cape Breton Regional Municipality bylaws that would ban smoking in those facilities? It's not as if there aren't other casinos that have no smoking policies, because there are. What is it really that's motivating them? Are you trying to take more patrons away from the community-based bingos? I know in my community, the great community of Lower Sackville, Mr. Chair, you can go around, you can take a look at all kinds of the facilities in that community. You can look at the sports arenas. You can look at the Met Field and other fields within that community. The canoe club. You can take a look at gymnastics and the facility they have, and the list goes on. Recreational opportunities or activities for young people and families. And where has a lot of the money come from? But community-based bingos, where volunteers have gone in and run an operation for years and plowed that money back into their communities. And each and every one of us could mention and talk about the same things. Volunteer fire departments. One of the sources that they use to buy the equipment, to pay for training so they can go out and upgrade their skills to better protect the lives and the property of those who live within the communities. And the list goes on. Now, of course, some of those people who attend those community operations, community nonprofit bingos, smoke. The casinos caused them a major hit in lost revenues when they began. And they are predicting that the losses will increase now. And there's no need of it. I wonder how many people in Dartmouth South have approached the member from Dartmouth South and said, we want you to exempt the casino from smoking. I wonder how many people in Kings North approached the great author in the Daily News to tell him to exempt the casino from smoking. I bet you the number is 0. I know, Mr. Chair, not one person, not one, other than Tories on the government benches, not one other person has said to me they believe that casinos should be exempt from smoking. I've heard members of the government benches say, HRM should have left the smoking issue alone. Then we wouldn't be in this position. Well, shame on them, Mr. Speaker, for being concerned for the health and safety of those who work or visit in that casino. That amendment, that clause in this bill, Financial Measures Act, should not be in this bill to begin with. Should not be here. You're trying to override municipal powers. So maybe, Mr. Chair, that should be an amendment to the Municipal Act, but certainly not here. Or it should be a standalone bill. The Tories' anti-good health bill, or the Tories' opposed to smoke-free places legislation. Call it what you will. It should not be in this bill. We're also, Mr. Chair, and I don't know that I'm going to use my full hour or a full hour this time, but I can say a few other things on a couple of other topics. And I may get inspired to come back again later on the title before the bill goes on to clause by clause. But Mr. Chair, there's been a lot talked about in terms of the tax breaks in this bill, if you can call them that. And Mr. Chair, there is no doubt in my mind that Nova Scotia families deserve and need a break. Nova Scotia families today have been being hammered and hammered again, and they need and they deserve a break. And there are ways to give those breaks to Nova Scotia families, and I might add, Mr. Chair, to Nova Scotia businesses and Nova Scotians who are involved in the trucking industry and other ways, other than what is being done by this legislation. For example, strikes me as if there is something wrong with this picture. The person in Nova Scotia who has the highest income in this province, whoever that person may happen to be, the person who makes the most money on about June the 17th is going to get a check in the mail for $155. The person in Nova Scotia who is the poorest, somebody who is disabled, living on a low disability pension, a senior who, Mr. Chair, is struggling to maintain and stay in their own home, Mr. Chair, who is in receipt of the income supplement because their incomes are so low, those, Mr. Chair, who are making minimum wage, trying to support themselves and possibly their family on the miserly Nova Scotia minimum wage, those people get zip, not one plug nickel. And you know, Mr. Chair, our fearless leader, the Premier, I should say, well, he's the Premier for all Nova Scotia. The Minister of Finance say, well, that's because they don't pay taxes. So therefore, since they don't pay taxes, income tax, they shouldn't get anything back. Well, Mr. Chair, that senior who is living on a low fixed income, that person who became disabled, maybe through a workplace accident or for health reasons, Mr. Speaker, those individuals may have spent their entire adult life working, contributing, and paying provincial income tax. But, Mr. Chair, now, since their income, they have fallen upon harder times and their incomes have dropped to the point where they don't have enough money to have to pay income tax. I'm sure they'd love to. Be quite happy to have a lot more money coming in, so enough money that they're at above the tax rate. Those people who are below it, Mr. Chair. But you know, Government says, you aren't worthy of getting a tax break. But you know what else, Mr. Chair? I know you're very astute, so you would know this. Almost every conceivable license and fee, permit, you name it, that is obtained from the government has been cranked up in recent years. I think to the tune of about $300 million. Now, you know, Mr. Chair, when I pull into the gas station, I pay tax on my gasoline. I pay provincial tax, federal tax, plus HST, and of course, I pay the extra 2 cents that the Tories put on gasoline, supposedly to improve our roads. So I thought that's what all the tax money was supposed to be for, Mr. Chair, but now it's 2 cents. That's paying taxes. And whether I'm the richest person in this province or the poorest person in this province, if I put gasoline in a car, I'm paying tax. If I put oil in my tank at home or pay electricity bill, Mr. Chair, I'm paying tax, HST tax. So, doesn't matter where you're at in the income level, Mr. Chair, if you go out and you buy something, you're a taxpayer. Hopefully the member for Chester St. Margaret's realizes that. That if you buy a product and you're paying taxes on it, you're a taxpayer. But no, you don't qualify, according to this government, for any kind of assistance. About 300,000 Nova Scotians get zip. But the wealthiest get something back. Those who are struggling to survive, I get a stack, Mr. Chair, of cards from Nova Scotians, just in Lower Sackville, who are enraged about the rate increases in automobile insurance. And you know what, Mr. Chair? That $155 check won't begin to cover the increases that Nova Scotia today's families are facing in higher automobile insurance rates. While this government sits on its hands, whistles into the wind, says, oh, we got a plan, doesn't even understand their own legislation, because, of course, they can't do half of the things they're trying to apply they can. They just want this out of the way until after the election. That money, Nova Scotia today's families need a break. And that could include a tax break, Mr. Chair. But let's be progressive about it. Let's put the member from Preston, he says we are. He agrees. He agrees with depriving the people in his constituency that he represents, who are the lowest income people, he agrees in depriving them of so much as 1 red cent back. I'm sure the member from Preston is going to go door to door and say to the people, well, you didn't get your check back. Oh, that's too bad. Well, you didn't deserve it because you don't pay taxes. Say that to the people who are struggling to survive in their own homes or support their family. He's going to tell them, you're not a taxpayer, so you aren't worthy. And he'll walk up to the most expensive homes in his riding and say, where the people, and actually some people who live in quite expensive homes, Mr. Chair, are struggling too, because circumstances can hit them as well. But he's going to go up to those who have the most and say, aren't you so grateful? We gave you a glass turkey check in June. Next time that you're down on a cruise or down in the Dominican Republic or somewhere's on a nice vacation in the middle of the the cold winter, you can use this money and get yourself another, fancy meal or something when you're out of the country. While those who are struggling just to survive get nothing. Would have been such a novel idea. Novel idea. And it's not too late. You could take the HST off home heat oil. Imagine how many Nova Scotia families right across this past winter would have benefited from not paying the provincial sales tax on their oil, Mr. Speaker, trying to heat their homes when many people were forced trying to decide between heat and food. Could have done that. Could take the sales tax off children's clothing. Could have provided the Minister of Health with some funds, Mr. Chair, so that the health care costs of seniors in long-term care facilities could be gone today, not in another 4 years. But that would have interfered with the Tories' long-range plans, because if lightning strikes twice and the Tories are re-elected, they're counting on that to be one of their election strategies or election platforms in the year 2007. Now, I'm optimistic that Mr. Dexter, the leader of the New Democrats, will be premier after the next election, and therefore, Mr. Speaker, seniors and seniors' families will not have to wait so long for justice, Mr. Speaker, because there are choices that are made, can be made, Mr. Chair, that will help today's families, not, Mr. Chair, just try to help the Tories' re-election campaign, which I think is in a little bit of a nosedive. Mr. Chair. Taxes, you name it, on almost every item, Nova Scotia, whether it's an environmental permit, registering your car, driver's license, going in to register a mortgage or a loan, you name it, marriage certificates. The Tories have been cranking up the fees and ripping the monies out. But supposedly these aren't taxes. So those are user fees. So those families who pay those higher user fees, if you are struggling financially on low incomes, you can't afford to buy a marriage certificate because you don't have any money, then, Mr. Chair, if your income level is so low, you don't even get a glass turkey back. There's something wrong with Tory priorities. We're not opposed. I'm not opposed to a tax break. There are growing revenues in this province. But I'm more interested in Nova Scotians who are in real need, the working poor of this province, the middle class, getting that money, getting a way to help them provide for their families, for their children, for their parents, for their loved ones, Mr. Chair, for their community, than I am in having money go to those at the very top end of their scale so they can spend it out of the country on vacations. Students in this province paying the highest tuition rates in the country. What could be done, Mr. Chair? What a better way to invest money. That's a tax break. Invest it in our young people by bringing down the cost of a post-secondary education. Then those young people will get the skills, will get the training, and will get the benefit as they go into our workforce with those skills, with those entrepreneurial skills and drive, growing the economy. There are things that can be done. There are choices that can be made. You don't just have to make crass political decisions aimed at trying to, I almost said that word, Mr. Chair, that you would have told me was unparliamentary, so I won't use it. I caught myself because I'm being good. Mr. Chair, it started with a B, and it does rhyme with tribe, yes, but I won't say the word. Instead, Mr. Chair, what I will say is the government is trying, through using our money, to purchase the goodwill of Nova Scotians to re-elect them. I got away with what I just said, so I'm going to leave well enough alone. Mr. Chair. You could have progressive changes in the tax system, having more in the way of a progressive system so that those who are in the low and middle income tax brackets pay a little less, lower rate than those who are at the highest levels. Mr. Chair, there are a lot of things that could be done. You could actually, Mr. Chair, they could have used a few dollars. Well, actually, they didn't even have to. All they had to do was use some of the research that we've been doing. We've been able to do it without costing taxpayers anything. Government should have been able to do it as well. Research into the insurance industry and how Nova Scotians are being hammered over and over and over again by rate increases. Mr. Chair. Today's families do deserve a break. No question about it. None whatsoever. There is a chance, there is a time yet for these Tories who face us. They can prove, Mr. Chair, that they aren't part of the dark side, and they can join the force of the light, as so to speak, Mr. Chair. I had to get that in there. But that's stretching it a little bit too far, Mr. Chair, because
They'll start talking about the bunker and the curtains.
I can't expect that group to be that enlightened. But, Mr. Chair, they certainly have the ability. Well, no, I shouldn't say they have the ability, because I don't know that they do have that ability. They once had the ability. Hopefully it's not totally lost. They should have the ability to be able to lift that veil of secrecy that surrounds them. They should be able to come out from behind the curtain that surrounds the cabinet bunker, go out into the light, listen to Nova Scotians, and hear what Nova Scotians are actually telling them. And not only listen to the spin doctors who are advising the Premier on the election strategy, which I think has hit a little bit of a speed bump, Mr. Chair. I thank the new NDP leader for that, because he certainly has been bringing to the fore those issues that matter to Nova Scotia families, talking in very concrete terms about them. Mr. Chair, get out behind your spin doctors, those who sit down and develop your election strategies. And if you actually listen to and hear what's going on in people's lives, you might amaze yourselves. You might find out that the best election strategy, the best election or way to try to get reelected is actually trying to address those issues that are front and center and very real in the lives of today's families and today's businesses here in Nova Scotia. There is a time. We will try to provide a little bit of time for the government to have second thoughts about what they're doing. That even includes a member from Preston. he can start to think. And he said thank you. He welcomes that. He's glad that some of us are talking. Maybe now he will actually hear, not just, or I should say listen, not just hear what Nova Scotians are saying. And Mr. Speaker, it also would provide some time for the Minister of Finance to obtain a valid, independent legal opinion about the casino and the no smoking provision, Mr. Chair. He could even then, Mr. Chair, table that report. Because, Mr. Chair, it's quite obvious that what the government has introduced is something self-serving rather than something that is serving the best interests of the people of this province or those who work or visit that facility, Mr. Chair. So with those few brief and overly flattering comments toward this government, I will resume my seat and allow another member to have their say. And as I said, I may find it necessary to come back to speak again on the title before the debate has concluded. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. The Honourable, the member for Cape Breton South.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And in Committee of the Whole House, it's a pleasure to rise and have the opportunity to say a few words about Bill 36, a bill that I would characterize in a number of ways. It's an omnibus bill that the government has brought before this House. Not only that, Mr. Speaker, it's a smoke and mirrors bill, and a bill that I suggest has to be given due consideration by members of this House prior to allowing this bill to ultimately pass. And I have to say to you, Mr. Speaker, that this bill will ultimately pass because it is a government-enabling legislation bill, and it is a bill that is controlled by the majority of members in the House, which are on the government benches. So I'm under no illusions that this bill at some point is not going to pass this House. It will. But I'm hoping that between the Committee of the Whole House and third reading that the government will see in its wisdom the need to make changes to the bill by way of some amendments. Hopefully, Mr. Chairman, that we can also introduce some amendments during the course of this debate that would make the bill more saleable to us and also ultimately to the benefit of the consumers, Nova Scotians. There are a number of sections in this bill, Mr. Speaker, that are worthy of repeating as we did in second reading. We had the opportunity to discuss the bill at length in second reading, and we have another opportunity to do that here in Committee of the Whole House. Mr. Chairman, the bill itself, the Financial Measures Act, has become the centerpiece of this government's march towards the next election. There are several important aspects of the bill besides the tax rebate and the tax cut scheme, but none that will affect Nova Scotians more. Mr. Chairman, echoing the comments of the previous speaker regarding the section in the bill dealing with the exemption for the Halifax or the casinos in Nova Scotia, I have to say as well that the Cape Breton Regional Municipality took the initiative early on to bring into their act a non-smoking place in the casino in Sydney, as well as no smoking ban in public places. I think their legislation is light years ahead of the provincial legislation that was proposed, and also the exclusion clause that's in this particular bill regarding the casinos in this province. If you read what has been said publicly about this, the government is creating an uneven playing field here. And I want to refer to an article that came out last Saturday by our leader, Danny Graham, when he said that the Conservative government should place their priority on worker health and safety and forego its provision to exempt the casino from the municipal smoking bylaw, says Liberal leader Danny Graham. Well, that, I think, echoes the comments and the interest that Nova Scotians have in this particular legislation, and wondering why the government is pursuing with this and why they just don't take that provision out of the bill. Because the news reports also suggested late last week, casino operators indicated they would abide by smoking bylaws in Sydney and Halifax. Obviously, Mr. Chairman, as our leader states too, the government jumped to try to solve a problem that doesn't exist. They didn't consider the costs to health and safety of the workers involved in the casino. And you have to wonder, Mr. Chairman, whether or not the government even discussed this matter prior to bringing this bill to the House with the casino operators in this province. I've said it in my place here last week, Mr. Chairman, that this is not a make or break deal for the casino operators in this province. Do you think for one moment that the casinos are going to walk with the kind of money they're making in Nova Scotia because of this particular section? Not likely. So I suggest that the government should do the right thing here in protecting workers from secondhand smoke in a public place by putting everybody on the same playing field, a level playing field. Mr. Chairman, the bill is so filled with contradictions, so filled with the kinds of information that we need to continue to bring to public light, but none more so than the Premier's own statements in regarding the financial side of this bill, Mr. Chairman, in regards to where the government is going with its fiscal policies. Here, Mr. Chairman, you have a government that is promising to bring in a tax cut next January 1st, at the same time borrowing money to do it. You have a government, Mr. Chairman, that has consistently borrowed money since it took office 4 years ago. And I want to read into the record, Mr. Chairman, some of the statements that the Premier of this province has made over the past couple of years regarding this particular issue, Mr. Chairman. On June 19th, 1999, and I quote the Premier, "We have to stop piling up debt before it's too late. We have to start living within our means. Stop mortgaging our children and grandchildren, otherwise we're going to end up financially and morally bankrupt." Premier's own words, Mr. Chairman. But since then, we've been borrowing money steadily. The debt is rising. The debt is approaching $12 billion in this province, and its own finance minister has stated in this House that the debt will continue to grow in the next decade in this province. Also, the Premier has made a statement on March 4, 2002. To be sure, there are some people who suggest that government should continue borrowing on its debt and spending beyond its means. Now, here's what the Premier said about that. I don't believe there is merit to that argument. Such an approach might feel good today. However, we have to ask ourselves who pays for it tomorrow. That was the Premier's remarks. That's Premier Ham. He made those remarks. We need to ask ourselves who pays for it tomorrow. Well, if the Premier really believes this, why is this government borrowing money? Why is the debt continuing to rise? Why is the debt in this province gone to $1 billion in interest payments to service the debt alone a year? The second largest item of government expenditure is the interest alone on the debt. And that, Mr. Chairman, is without retiring one nickel of the debt. $1 billion is to service the interest on that debt. Second year in a row, the debt repayment costs in this province have gone over $1 billion. Now, is that the responsible borrowing that the Premier talks about? Again, on June 26, 1999, a progressive Conservative government is committed to reducing the provincial debt. Over our first 4-year mandate, we will ensure the debt is the true debt that includes all and off-book borrowing, and borrowing will not increase. Well, you know, it's all right to say those words, but it's another thing to live by them, and the Premier has abdicated that totally. That position that he takes publicly when it's convenient for him to take that position means nothing in reality, because the reality is that the government has borrowed every single year since they came to power. They're continuing to borrow this year, and they're continuing to project borrowing well into the future, to the point where the debt repayment costs and interest alone is going to grow up from $1 billion. You know, Mr. Chairman, this province, in a population of less than 1 million people, pays more to service its debt than it does for public education. And that, Mr. Chairman, is not only bad business, but that is morally unjust. That we pay more for debt repayment than we do on education in this province. The only item, expenditure line item in this province that's more than the debt repayment is health care. And that, in the recent budget, is over $2 billion, when again, the Premier said we would not have to go past $1.5 billion to adequately look after health care. Well, Mr. Chairman, we're up over $2 billion now, and the health care issue is still a matter of grave concern for Nova Scotians. Mr. Chairman, the way the finance minister talks about capital assets, you would think that they found a money printing machine. You know, they're coming out with all kinds of schemes this year to try and win re-election, and are going down the same road, Mr. Chairman, that the previous government from in the 80s did, up until 93, when they continued to borrow their way, election after election, until the province was approaching bankruptcy in 1993. Matter of fact, Mr. Chairman, the debt, or the deficit, not the debt, the deficit in 1993 was over $1 billion. The deficit for 1 year. 1992, approaching the 1993 budget year, the government literally hit the wall with the financial problems they were having. Mr. Chairman, it's become obvious that the government is putting politics before any sound policy. And we spoke in the House last week on second reading on this bill. When members of our party spoke, we talked about the fact that Nova Scotians are not all being treated equally here. Far from it. While Nova Scotians should welcome the so-called gift they're going to be getting back with their own money prior to an election, the $155, it should be noted here that not all Nova Scotians are going to get that $155. A lot of seniors aren't going to get it. Students in university who are paying back student loans aren't going to get it. Low-income Nova Scotians who didn't pay provincial income tax in the past 2 years are not going to get it. A considerable number of Nova Scotians, the three groups I just mentioned, are perhaps the three groups in this province that need it most. And none of them are going to get it. None of them. So is that fair and equitable? You know, the interesting part of that, Mr. Chairman, is all those people pay the same bills. They pay the same for gasoline in their car. They pay the same for home heating oil if they're lucky enough to still have a home. They pay the same for items that they need day in and day out that this government has taxed heavily over the past couple of years with user fees. They weren't asked not to pay those bills because they don't pay provincial income tax. They still have to pay those. But they're not going to be the beneficiary of this $155. Now, who is going to be the beneficiary? A lot of people in this province who are going to get that $155 need it. No doubt about that. They need it to pay back some of the costs that this government have allowed to accrue on their bottom line each and every day in this province. And I refer to the tremendous number of user fees that have been put on Nova Scotians in the past couple of years. I refer, Mr. Chairman, to gasoline tax increase at the pump that the Premier allowed to go through when he said he wasn't going to do any increasing of any taxes in this province, save taxes on tobacco. Well, he broke that promise. And he broke the promise even in more ways than one, because instead of calling a lot of the increased costs that Nova Scotians were burdened with, Mr. Chairman, the Premier allowed his government ministers to put in user fees, a system of user fees on virtually everything that Nova Scotians have to acquire. But it is completely illogical. You know, Mr. Speaker, Nova Scotians have to realize that this government is only giving back Nova Scotians those that are going to get it, a small portion of the increased costs that they've incurred since this government took office. So they're getting a small portion of that back. But that's going to cost $68 million, Mr. Chair. $68 million. The province is borrowing $118 million this year, on top of the money they borrowed last year and the year before that and the year before that, and will borrow for the next 7 or 8 years after this one. And that was determined in statements of this House to be true by the Minister of Finance. Now, in a province, again, I want Nova Scotians to take note that we have a population of less than 1 million people, and our long-term debt is approaching $12 billion. That's billion, not million. And this debt servicing is now well over $1 billion a year and projected to rise. Now, you know, we have a situation here where this government's clearly trying to buy its way back to election. And two things will happen, Mr. Chairman. If they go to the election and win, they will then say to Nova Scotians, we made some calculation mistakes, and we have to adjust the budgets next year. We really didn't have a surplus. We had a huge deficit. So we've got to start cutting back on you again. Or, if they lose the election, and that would be my preference, of course, then it's somebody else's problem. They'll just walk away. And the new government will have to grapple with the problem that the current government is leaving behind. You know, Mr. Chairman, this government has flip-flopped so many times on so many issues that Nova Scotians have no idea where they stand on anything. You know, and to try and con Nova Scotians into thinking they're good managers by giving a check back on the eve of an election is not going to work. Nova Scotians are smarter than that. They know. They know. They're going to take the 155. Who wouldn't? They're going to take the 155, but they're not going to vote Tory because they know why the 155 is going out. And they know that Nova Scotians are borrowing the money to send the 155 out. And they know that in addition to that, they're borrowing money to put a 10% tax reduction in place next January 1st, Mr. Chairman, on the provincial income tax only. So what does that do? Let's do an analysis of that for a moment. The 10% cut on provincial income tax, who does that affect more than anybody else? Affects those with larger incomes more because they pay more provincial income tax. Does it affect the low-income people in Nova Scotia? No. They're not going to get a break on that, or a very small break. Does it affect the lower middle-class earner in this province, the person that's out there working for $8, $9, $10 an hour? No, because they're not going to pay large sums of provincial income tax. But what happened a couple of years ago, well, not year 2000, when the federal income tax break came in, every other province in Canada allowed that to flow through. But Nova Scotia kept it. The government of Nova Scotia kept it. And now they're trying to give a portion of that back on their own time schedule. And that's not going to work, Mr. Chairman, because the people of Nova Scotia know that that's just another cynical attempt at buying votes. Now, Mr. Speaker, or Mr. Chairman, when you look at this bill and you look at what the provisions in this bill do, you have to realize that it's the government's enabling legislation. It enables them to do certain financial issues. It's the legitimacy, I guess, to those issues that is put in place by the passage of this bill. Now, there were a number of presentations made at law amendments, some very good presentations. But the government wasn't listening. The government has its mind made up regarding this bill. The only way that we can hope to have the government see the wisdom of making some changes is to hopefully, during the course of debate at this stage of the legislative process, is to introduce some amendments here when we get into clause-by-clause examination of the bill. And I hope that we get to that stage with this bill, because it would be a shame if we were not able to put some amendments on the table here that would improve this bill. Well, in second reading, we moved a motion that would improve it because it would set it aside for 6 months. That would be a major improvement in it, but that didn't work. So now we're going to have to try to improve it with some amendments that may affect certain parts of the bill. Now, Mr. Chairman, we have here a bill that addresses a number of issues. Some of them greatly affect Nova Scotians, and some of them are parts of this bill that should be examined more closely than we've done to date. And I hope that the speakers that will be getting up on this bill will remind Nova Scotians that this is nothing but an election goodie package from this government, that the government, who I believe up until last week thought that they had the right recipe to get to the polls, and found out that they weren't perhaps fooling Nova Scotians as much as they thought they were going to. So now they're taking a second look at their timetable. They're taking a second look, I suggest, at the analysis of the polling that they were doing over the past few weeks. The polling that the chairman of the Treasury Board in that states he doesn't remember what was in the polling, and didn't know whether it was written down or not, whether it was verbal or whether it was written, or whether what was in it. But I do know, fast on the heels of that, the Premier has now decided that he's going to postpone the calling of election for another few weeks, and then there'll be some more polling done at public expense, I guess, to find out what Nova Scotians think of this $155 check they're going to get. But I can tell you what Nova Scotians that I deal with think about it. They're going to take it because they say the government owes me a lot more than that from what they've took from me in the past couple of years. But I can tell you, Mr. Chair, what they're saying is, we're going to take the $155 because it's owed to us. But don't think you're buying our vote by us taking that $155. Because we're not being fooled by that. We're not being fooled by the fact that the government could have borrowed the money last year, which they're borrowing to pay it this year, and sent out the $155 last year. But that wasn't close to an election. That wasn't on the eve of an election. Nova Scotians would have forgot about it by now. But Nova Scotians aren't going to forget that this government, this ham government, is trying to buy their votes. Not even pretending that that's not the case. They're going right out and putting the check in your hand. You know, I remember days hearing stories way back when in the 40s and the 50s when you were running around and you had to have the election gifts in the trunk of the cars and that kind of thing, you know. And I notice when you start talking about political patronage and trying to buy votes, it always wakes the Tories up. You know, because they know that they're masters at it, and it always wakes them up. And Mr. Chair, you know, it's not even a pretense anymore, Mr. Chairman. It's not even a pretense anymore. Now, instead of trying to hide the election goodies away for election day, or in the trunk of a car, or in the back seat of a car, they just send you a check now. Say, here, vote for us. Here's a check, vote for us. $155 ballot. Rum bottle budget. But that particular move is one that's out in the open now. We know what's happening there. But it's the backgrounder to that, and it's the what's going to happen with the public treasury over the next few months and years as a result of that, and as a result of the fact that 300,000 Nova Scotians aren't going to get that check, the government has miscalculated that, I think, and is going to incur the wrath of those people, that's for sure, at election time. And probably a lot of people that are going to get the check have relatives or friends or mothers or fathers or sisters or brothers that aren't going to get the check. So I think they miscalculated that, and I think their polling is telling them that. Polling, by the way, that's probably paid for by the public purse, but that's another story. But it's a cynical exercise, Mr. Chairman, of borrowing money to do that. $68 million that's going to cost, and it's all borrowed. You know, are they going to borrow just as much money to repair all the roads in this province that are falling apart in disrepair? You can't even drive over some of them. Are they borrowing money for that? Are they borrowing money to put up some repairs to schools that are necessary? Are they borrowing money to relieve Nova Scotians of high costs of insurance? Are they doing anything about that? No, they're not doing anything about that. A good friend of mine from Sydney, who I mentioned the other day, his name is Donnie McLean. He's a good friend of mine. He's a pensioner. He gets his pension, and he's just got a whopping increase in his insurance rates. Doubled. Going to double. Now, he's not going to come in, and there's another bill before this House that's going to freeze rates between May 1st and December 31st. He's not going to get the benefit of that because his rates have already been increased. And he's likely not going to get the 155. He's not sure of that, but I would suggest to you that he's in that area of concern that he may not have paid any provincial income tax last year. I don't know that. But he's checking that out. But he says, my insurance has doubled and tripled. I'm getting $155 back from this government, and I'm going to get a 10% decrease in provincial tax next year, and I'm not going to see any of that because the amount of provincial income tax I pay is so little, it's not going to make any difference to me. But he said, I've had to pay increased home heating oil costs that have doubled and sometimes tripled in the past couple of years. I've had to pay increased car insurance. I've had to pay increased more money for my license. I've had to pay money for just about everything going. And the government's going to try to buy my vote with $155. And in order to do that, they're going to borrow more money. And they're not going to do anything about my high cost of insurance, my high cost of home heating oil, and all the other goods and services that I have to buy. Now, Mr. McLean is not unique. He's typical of a lot of senior citizens in this province that are really concerned about trying to maintain their own homes and trying to live on the meager income they have. Yet this government is going to make that even harder for them in the future by engaging in a situation coming up, and I can see it coming in the next couple of years, where the full stop is going to go on again, and we're going to start cutting back, and we're going to start increasing the user fees again and increasing taxes again, because the debt is once again going to become unmanageable in this province. As I said earlier, $12 billion, $1 billion in payments to service that debt. Second heaviest line item that the government has on its books, second only to health care, more than education. When a government can sit there in their places and talk about responsibility, when we're paying more to service the debt in this province than we are for our children's education, then shame on them. Shame on them, Mr. Chair. When a premier can stand in his place and say year after year leading up to this year that there'll be no increases in debt in this province, and yet the debt's gone up every year. What does that tell you about the credibility of the premier? What does that tell you? Is it a feel-good message of the day? I believe so, because we have all kinds of messages here from the premier. All kinds of statements. Not going to allow any more borrowing in the province. 3 years ago he said that. Did he keep his word on that? No. Not going to increase taxes in this province. User fees. Did he keep his word on that? No. And what about his position on Sunday shopping, Mr. Chair? Flip-flop so many times on that now that Nova Scotians have no idea what he stands for anymore when it comes to that. Now you tell me, Mr. Chair, what's the difference in allowing Sunday shopping for 6 Sundays rather than 52 Sundays? If in his opinion it's not good for Nova Scotia on one Sunday, it shouldn't be good for Nova Scotians on any Sunday. But he's even waffling on that. He's in the middle of the issue because he knows he and his government are offside with public opinion on this issue and are trying to scramble to a middle-of-the-road position here that's going to get them through the election. And then perhaps the Premier will go back to his initial stance of his moral values in regards to Sunday shopping. And you know I've said it here before a number of times, Mr. Chair, that this is the only province in Canada where on Sunday morning in a casino you can lose your shirt, but on Sunday afternoon you can't buy one in the store in Nova Scotia. What hypocrisy, Mr. Chair, what hypocrisy. There's a church that I know well in Sydney that's only 1 block from the casino. And at 11 o'clock on a Sunday morning, you can't get in the casino parking lot, but you can get in the church parking lot. The people are in there on Sunday morning gambling. Well, I'm not taking a moral high ground here. All I'm saying is that if it's good enough to have people gamble at 11 o'clock on Sunday morning, surely in this province in the year 2003, we would allow somebody to buy a shirt at 2 o'clock in the afternoon in the store. But this government has chosen to try to take try to be something to all people here to try to get them through the election. That's what's going on here. When did it become okay to have shopping on one Sunday but not another Sunday? Are some Sundays more religious than other Sundays? They are, yeah, okay. The member from Preston says they are. So the 6 before Christmas are more religious days than the other 46 Sundays, are they? And the member from Preston wants to join this debate, Mr. Chair. He can certainly take his place and get up and debate this issue when I take my place. You know, when it comes to smoking in the casino, which is another issue that I touched on earlier, you know, I remember Bill 68. As a matter of fact, I had the opportunity to discuss Bill 68 at length and was so frustrated during the debate on that bill that I found myself outside the chambers for a day because I was so incensed with the government's position on Bill 68. The government had no qualms about browbeating labor in this province or browbeating nurses or browbeating teachers into submission with the big hammer of Bill 68. But where's the government's concern right now for workers who have to live with secondhand smoke in the casino? You know, and people are willing in this province to accept the fact that secondhand smoke kills, that smoking is dangerous to your health. People are still going to smoke, that's fine. That's up to them. But protect workers in business establishments is the responsibility of not only the business but the government. And what they've done is set up a two-tier system here where some businesses have to abide by the rules and others don't. They're dividing the business community on that issue, as they are dividing Nova Scotians on that issue as well, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, this bill, I think, could be improved upon, but it's not. The government is not going to do anything here except use its mandate, use its majority in the House to put the bill through at some point when it's run out of time. You know, Mr. Speaker, and I think you have to say it over and over again. Borrowing $118 million this year to give back 68 is not good business. It's not good business. Because when you add that to the long-term debt of this province, when you play Russian roulette with the interest rates to see whether or not you're going to get a break, and we don't know how they're going to project out over the next couple of years, the economy is not going to be as buoyant as it is. You know, you have a premier here who leads a government who has stated in this House that the economy of Nova Scotia is going to grow without oil and gas. We don't need oil and gas. It's obvious they're not doing anything with it, so it's obvious they don't need it. But he forgets to tell Nova Scotians how the economy is going to grow. He can't tell Nova Scotians because he doesn't know. The only way they have a growing economy here in Nova Scotia is to put increased user fees on consumers. In other words, tax people out of their homes. Charge them so much, allow them to be gouged by increasing costs. And again, I have to remind this government that they're getting a windfall off the increase in insurance rates in this province. I believe $7 million in additional revenue going into the bottom line this year because of the increases. And if that's the case, why don't they give that $7 million back to those people who've had to pay higher costs? But whether it be in home heating oil, whether it be in taxes, or whether it be in some of the other user fees. Declare a holiday for some people on user fees. That would be constructive. The user fees that everybody pays in this province. And some of the people who pay those user fees, Mr. Chair, are not going to be the recipients of the 155 check. Now, Mr. Chair, the government has not addressed the issue of a number of people in our society in this province. It's not addressed in this bill. It's not addressed in any government legislation. But, you know, there are students out there that are hurting, Mr. Chair. I would have hoped that the government would have come forth with legislation that meant something this year on student loan remission. They didn't. Any student that's in the system now can't access any of that. And they've come up with a half-baked measure for the future, which is not going to satisfy anybody because there's simply not enough money in the plan. They know that. But again, it's symbolic of a government here who's trying to project all these things just to the end of the election. And the election is over, and then it's brakes on everything. We're going to rethink this or we're going to rethink that. I wouldn't be surprised if they even come to the stage, if they're lucky enough to win the election, Mr. Chair, that they rethink the 10% tax cut next year because they're not going to have the money to do it, unless they go ahead and borrow again. But they're less likely to do that once they get through the first term, if they're lucky enough to do that. But I want to touch on another group of people here who are in this province continuing to hurt badly. And that's the people on low and fixed incomes and the people who live, in some cases, on as little as $620 a month. $620 a month. They're a very vulnerable group in this province, and they don't have any advocate out there for them. They don't have anybody that's going to pass them a check. They don't have anybody that's going to stand up for them in that government. That government has forgotten about those people. They've forgotten about the single mothers in this province who are struggling with trying to raise children and also go to university and try to improve their lot in life educationally so they can get off the system. The stories that I'm getting from that group are nothing short of tragic, the way the government treats that group of people. The way the government treats the number of people in our society that are living on less than $8,000 a year. And there are a number of seniors out there that aren't eligible as yet for the Old Age Assistance Program or the Canada Pension Program that can't work anymore, that are disabled and depending on public finances, to the grand sum of $620 in some cases a month. And some of those people are paying upwards of $500 a month rent. They're not going to get that 155. They're not going to get the 10% tax break next January. They're not going to get anything. They're struggling to make ends meet and getting no assistance from that government at all. Mr. Chair, the government has its priorities mixed up here, but not only that, the government also, Mr. Chair, is mortgaging the future of the middle class in this province. At some point, people who are working and making a good middle-class income in this province, well, you don't have to worry, Mr. Chair, about the rich. The rich can take care of themselves. They can adjust. But the middle-class people are going to do some adjusting in the next couple of years when they find out what this government has left them in debt. So it's not only the low-income people that are going to be put at risk here, or they're already at risk. It's the middle-income people that are going to be put at risk with their children in the future of this province by the legacy this government is going to leave, a legacy of massive debt in this province. When it comes to a situation where you're paying over $1 billion a year in debt repayment, you have a serious problem unless you put the brakes on. And this government, by virtue of statements made by its own finance minister, have said the debt is going to increase for the next 7 years. They don't say how much it's going to increase, but it's going to increase. On top of the debt increases this government have already placed as a burden on Nova Scotians. Mr. Chair, I'm sure that members on this side of the House are going to be talking about amendments to this bill over the next few days, are going to be talking to government members to suggest ways to improve this Financial Measures Act. We're saying on the $155 check that's due to come out, and I guess the timing of that will be sometime around the dropping of the writ or the election or in that area. We're saying Nova Scotians deserve that. They deserve the $155 because the government owes it to them. They've ripped more than that out of their pockets in the past couple of years. But what we see wrong with that is that this government is being selective. Not everybody's going to get that. The ones that are going to get it will take it and say, thank you very much, you owe me a lot more, but this is a down payment on everything that I believed you were going to do for me in the past 3 or 4 years. But instead of that, you've increased just about every way of life that I enjoy in this province by increasing almost everything I have to acquire. And you've done nothing on my high insurance rate problems. You've done nothing on my home heating oil problems. You've done nothing to relieve the burden of extremely high user fees. You've done nothing for my child in school or my children who are in the public system except play catch up in some respects, and the stats and the kinds of information we're getting from the education sector across this country will tell you where we're heading there, unless we take a quick full stop and evaluate our priorities in spending in education. As I said before, Mr. Chair, it's tragic when you spend more on debt repayment in a province than you do on public education. That speaks volumes about where this government's priorities are. The government's priority is getting re-elected, not providing better education for citizens of this province. The government's priority is getting re-elected, not providing a meaningful program for student loan remission for people in university, students in university, and any kind of postgraduate institution as well. Government hasn't addressed that. The government is projecting these things out to give the illusion they are doing something when in fact they're doing nothing. When in fact everything is geared to that magic day when they get you to mark the ballot. Well, it's up to us to remind the students of this province that the government is doing nothing about their loan remission program. Nothing. Anybody that's in the system now doesn't access it. Mr. Chair, the government is doing nothing about relieving the burden of home heating oil, relieving the burden of user fees in this province, which they themselves have placed on the backs of Nova Scotians, or I should say, taken out of the wallets of Nova Scotians. And Mr. Chair, the government has done nothing in addressing the insurance issue in this province, except a weak, half-hearted attempt to get them through the election again. That in itself, people aren't buying. They know the difference, Mr. Chair. So Nova Scotians are left wondering, what's up with this government? Well, what's up with this government? Some of them are coming to me and saying, you know, the government's increasing our debt to give us half it back and to use the rest of it for their own political purposes. Then they're going to give us a tax cut, which they should have given us in 2000 when they wouldn't allow the federal tax cut to flow through. So they're giving us back money that was rightfully belonged to us in any case. The government is increasing the debt of this province, the long-term debt, when the Premier said he wouldn't increase it, that it wasn't beneficial, that he wasn't going to mortgage the future of the children of this province and the grandchildren by increasing the debt. Well, guess what? They've done that each and every year since they've taken office. Each and every year since they've taken office. So where does that leave the good people of Nova Scotia? Leaves them wondering what this government is all about. It leaves you wondering what this Premier is all about, the good country doctor from Pictou County, who has flip-flopped so many times in the past 4 years, he must have caught his neck coming around again, you know, by switching positions on many, many issues. Complete turnaround in some issues in this province. You know, and it's a different story every day. We heard, even as recently as last week, that the Premier couldn't recall whether or not they did any polling on Sunday shopping. That was the first time he was asked. Then he said, oh yes, there was a poll, but I'm not sure what it said. Then he said, in some parts of Nova Scotia, people favored it. Other parts didn't. Well, which parts were they, Mr. Premier? Well, we're not sure. We don't know if we have that in writing or not. I was told that. The chairman of the Treasury Board said the same thing. You know, the Minister of Transportation, he couldn't recall who did the poll, who paid for it, whether it was written down and where it was. The phantom poll, couldn't recall where it was. Asked them to table it, to tell us, give Nova Scotians the right information. You're not going to get that, Mr. Chair, because that's information that's going to guide, that's another piece of the puzzle that's going to guide them down the road to when it's advisable for them to finally pull the plug and face the electorate in this province. Well, Mr. Chair, they're going to have to do that soon because they're entering their 5th year in office in another couple of months. And they better not consider playing around with the electorate going into a 5th year in the first mandate of this government, because Nova Scotians will not put up with that this government trying to get another year out of its first mandate because the polls, or the so-called polls, the smoke and mirror polls that we're not able to access, tell them that things aren't right, that they're not fooling anybody on the check, that they're not fooling anybody on the debt, that Nova Scotians are smart enough to know that debt is still growing in this province. Nova Scotians are smart enough to know that down the road they're going to pay dearly for this government's financial indiscretions, that they're going to pay dearly for this government borrowing money to get themselves reelected this year. They're going to pay dearly for the student debt load in this province and the problems that are going to keep students out of university in the future unless a meaningful program is put on the table that will actually benefit students who are in the system now and those that are going to enter the system. They know, Nova Scotians know, that this government's only objective is to get reelected. To get reelected. And then you'll see what this government is all about if that happens. But, Mr. Chair, we're going to do everything possible to see that that doesn't happen. We're going to try to inform Nova Scotians of the problems that they're facing now and the non-solutions that are being arrived at on that side of the House, on the government side, rather the political agenda that's being employed out there to try to get them reelected. Nova Scotians, it's our responsibility to let Nova Scotians know as often as we can over the next few weeks and into the election campaign how they're being used by this government for the sole purposes of getting reelected. For the sole purposes of getting reelected, Mr. Chair. Now, Mr. Chair, I'm sure that I'm going to have an opportunity again to speak on this particular bill. I'm sure that once we get into clause-by-clause examination of the bill, we'll be able to perhaps put some amendments forth that will improve this bill. I hope that during that particular course of discussion that perhaps the government will see the wisdom of looking at some amendments that will be placed before this House for consideration. So until then, Mr. Chairman, I'll take my place and hopefully